Good morning, Master. Good morning, Venerables. And good morning, friends. My name is Xianchu, Cory. I've been giving a lot of talks on self-compassion, patience, a lot of things just particular towards the self. I'm going to hopefully finish up my self-compassion talk today. I know I gave one last year and I kind of touched on it this year as well. Um, I'm actually going to start by reading a story that was written by Ajahn Brahm. I decided I was going to add this last minute last night. It's a really interesting story that I've heard him give in a talk probably 7 years ago. It's a story of 7 monks. And centuries ago, 7 monks were in a cave in a jungle somewhere in Asia, meditating on the type of unconditional love. There was the head monk, his brother, and his best friend. The fourth was the head monk's enemy. They just could not get along. The fifth monk in the group was a very old monk, so advanced in years that he was expected to die at any time. And the last monk, the seventh, was the useless monk. He always snored when he was supposed to be meditating. He couldn't remember his chanting, and if he did, he would chant off key. He wouldn't even keep his robes on properly, but the others tolerated him and thanked him for his teachings and patience. One day, a gang of bandits discovered the cave. It was so remote, so well hidden, that they wanted to take it over as their own base. So they decided they were going to kill all the monks. The head monk, fortunately, was a very persuasive speaker. He managed, don't ask me how, to persuade the gang of bandits to let all of the monks go except for one, who would be killed as a warning to the other monks not to let anyone know their location of the cave. That was the best deal the head monk could wrangle with from the bandits. The head monk was left alone for a few minutes to make the decision of who he should sacrifice so that the others could go free. So if you take a minute to think about that, I feel a majority of people might start thinking the head monk is going to choose to sacrifice himself. Or perhaps one of the monks that are close to death might be another option. Or perhaps the useless monk. But for the most part, the majority of people always pick the head monk himself, which is a very Western way of thinking. The truth of the story is the monk couldn't decide because he loved everybody equally to include himself. So he told the bandits that he couldn't pick. And that's actually the end of the story. It's very anticlimactic. It doesn't tell you what happened to the bandits. It doesn't tell you what happens to the monks. The story just stops. So the moral is, though, that if you find it difficult to say to others that the door of my heart is always open, whatever it is that you do, if you can say that to others, you should be able to say that to yourself. It's called forgiveness. The moral of the story is forgiveness. It's stepping free from the prison of guilt. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be without fault to be able to show yourself loving kindness. If you wait until you're perfect, you'll never get there. Why are we so harsh on ourselves? We aren't as mean to some random person that we encounter on the street as we are to ourselves, our spouse, or family members. We're always so caustic. And my talk today is to briefly touch on this because I've already talked on it, but I want to cross over into the extremity of that. People who love themselves more than anything else. So self-compassion in general, it's something that everybody has a level of. Of course, excluding conditions of psychopaths and other people with similar mental conditions. But we're able to show compassion to other things. Like if you started hearing Sarah McLachlan music playing and you see a sad puppy on the screen, all of a sudden you are falling into a marketing technique that tugs at your compassion, your heartstrings. In general, we feel some sort of compassion when we see stuff like this. Of course, we'll feel compassion when a family member, a friend, or even a stranger experiencing in times of suffering. But why do we not feel that towards ourselves? Why do we beat ourselves up? We're hardwired from an evolutionary standpoint, if you really think about it. There are tons and tons of animals out there, and a lot of them live in herds or packs, and there are a few other creatures, though, on this planet that require the care and attention and compassion that a young human child requires to survive. There are about 18 other species, right off the top of my head, that live in social groups, but none require that level of compassion that humans do. And in Buddhism, the desire to lessen or eliminate suffering of others is referred to as Buddha nature, our awakened state. It's a natural state that exists, but over time, it becomes desensitized by our concepts, our ideas, and our beliefs. So part of our Buddhist practice is to increase the state of compassion to include living beings, and that means the self as well. And if we look at the 2 lines from the Four Immeasurables that we say often here, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. That part of the Four Immeasurables is rooted in the practice of increasing compassion. And if we can understand this is in a Buddhist perspective, everyone is deserving of compassion. There is no limit, there is no qualifiers. Everyone, period, is deserving of compassion. So if we look at compassion outside of our circle, let's give a for example. You're outside, maybe doing some yard work, and you see a car coming down the street. And then a dog gets out from your neighbor's house and it runs out to the street and gets hit. Your initial reaction is nothing of judgmental circumstances. Before you determine if the animal is deserving of compassion, you just automatically feel it. You don't feel bad for the animal, and you don't hope that you just hope that they aren't suffering. And you want to do anything you can to minimize their suffering. You don't run over to the animal and say, well, you shouldn't have crossed the road. See what you get? Well, why do humans do that to other humans? Let's say someone has been robbed. You'll inevitably hear someone say, well, you shouldn't have been in that area. Or worse, somebody gets raped. I have known people who have been sexually abused, and I have heard people say, you shouldn't have been dressed that way. That's a terrible train of thought, because compassion doesn't require a qualification or a judgment. Sure, there may be things that you can analyze to specific situations, and you can utilize that wisdom to avoid suffering, but it's like obeying stop signs. Once somebody runs that stop sign, let me backtrack. Down the road from me, we have a 4-way intersection, and there's 2 stop signs. One of them always has a tree hanging over it. So if you're not familiar with the neighborhood, you may not see that stop sign. And I have seen people run that stop sign many of times. So we have cross traffic that doesn't stop, and then somebody has ran through that stop sign and been hit by a truck. And there was injuries, nothing major. I mean, it's a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. It's still enough that somebody could. But once somebody runs that stop sign and gets into an accident and causes injury, you can feel compassion towards the injured person without requiring an analysis of whether or not this person deserved it. There's no need for judgment in that process. So if we go back to the start, it's easier to feel compassion the further out we are from ourselves. A stranger, a friend, a family, and then the self. The self is on the bottom of that list. So as a practice, if we want to increase our compassion for others, we should start with ourselves, because if you're capable of deep compassion for the self, you can imagine it radiating outward exponentially as it moves outward from within you. I found a formula when I first found Buddhism several years ago, and it's recently come up again, that suffering equals pain times resistance. An American mindfulness teacher, Sinzen Young, created a formula that suffering equals pain multiplied by resistance. So if you're looking at reducing suffering in yourself and the world, this equation might prove useful to you. And pain is any hardship that you may come across. The loss of a loved one, maybe you broke your phone, anything really, and your resistance to it was just saying that you're causing that pain to speak more loudly. We know that hardships are going to be part of life. And if you are pushing or against that hardship, you will cause more suffering. Right now, I prefer not to spend money on repairing my house. But creating tension or stress around that situation isn't going to change the fact that my house has repairs that need to be done. I don't have to convince myself that money is fun or spending money is fun, it's pleasant, or anything along those lines, nor am I going to be able to make it stop. I've been having sewer lateral issues that have been causing frequent floods in my basement. And at this point, the repairs have to happen. It's a lot of money, but it doesn't matter. If I push against the fact that the repair has to take place, I'm compounding the fact that I already have to do it. And why do we feel like we always have to push against hardships though? It doesn't really make sense when you put it into a mathematical formula. Can't I just accept that this is part of home ownership? Can't I accept the fact that this will prevent future occurrences of flooding in my basement? Saying these things that need to be done and that it's just part of home ownership is just way easier than actually fulfilling or following through with it. And this is why we practice meditation. Meditation practice is really just a simplified version of our everyday experiences. We have an intention to sit, be with the breath, and within minutes, and sometimes even within seconds, your mind is off wandering. And that's why today's guided meditation, I wanted to emphasize, don't see this as a problem, see this as an opportunity to bring yourself back into the breath or your mantra, whatever it is that you're meditating on. I could sit here and be like, oh, breathe in long, I breathe in, oh, I should cut the grass, or oh wait, I was meditating, and start beating myself up over it. So now I'm resisting the fact that my mind wandered, and I'm punishing myself for it. There was a time that I was sitting and meditating, and I left my stove on, and I thought during meditation, my mind wandered. Did I leave the stove on? I'm like, oh, it'll be fine. And then I went out, and sure enough, I did leave the stove on. I had two options at that point. I could have been mad at myself. Why did you leave the stove on? You could have burned the house down. Or what if one of my animals jumped up here? I don't think they get on the stove, but still an inevitable possibility. Who knows what they do when I'm not around, So I could have beat myself up about it. But instead, I recognized that nothing negative came from this, maybe a slightly higher electric bill. But I turned it off and just made a point of making sure I don't leave the stove on again. Once you start making judgments, you're adding resistance, and the pain increases, which causes more suffering. Let's say we set the resistance to 0, or maybe even 1. Let's say you sit down and meditate. You're saying your mantra, or you're counting your breath, whatever it is that you're sitting down and meditating on, and your mind wanders. Let's say I'm going breathing in long. I breathe in. I should cook dinner after this. Oh, wait, that was just a distraction. Come back to the breath. No judgment. This is a simple example of how we beat ourselves up. This meditation, I feel, is something that we can all kind of relate to. We don't have to beat ourselves up to learn. We don't have to be militant to understand and to get into the habit of something. And Zen teacher, my slide went away. Sorry, I did have a slide with this quote. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "Joy is whatever is happening, minus our opinion of it." She, of course, was not implying that everything all the time is going to be pleasant. That simply cannot be true. She means that there is a deeper kind of joy that arises when we can be with our experience exactly as it is, when we don't need to be any other way or resist life as it is. By being mindful in meditation, we learn how to make space for whatever is happening in life. Joy then becomes possible throughout any moment. I'm going to skip a slide because I want to get to the inverse of this, loving yourself too much. I'll cover the paradox of great suffering over nothing. The paradox with this mathematical formula is something tiny can cause massive amounts of pain, and we can feel a ton of pain without actually suffering. For example, recently I had AT&T install fiber in my house. The installer screwed up and did this with the cable. So he went under my drop ceiling and then back up through it. The internet worked, but I couldn't put my ceiling back together. I also couldn't get a hold of anybody at AT&T. Like the installer just left. I called AT&T. I got stuck on a 2-hour queue and had to put my phone number in for them to call me. And in the meantime, I'm getting on their chat and I have all these expectations. Each time I was on their e-chat, they wanted me to explain my story again. And they passed me to 4 different managers. So I had to type out, instead of copying and pasting like a smart person, I typed out everything that was going on 4 times. And it got to a point where they're like, well, we don't see anything wrong with your internet. And I'm like, it's not my internet that's the problem. It's how it was installed. And I didn't say anything about it not working or anything along those lines. But at this point, I started getting unreasonably upset because I had these really high expectations. They finally understood and they offered me a solution of we could have an installer out tomorrow. And I'm thinking, I took off of work today. I don't have time to take off work a second day for you to just come out and fix this minor inconvenience that I am adding so much resistance to and causing so much unneeded suffering. The person on the other end of the computer has probably no idea what I'm talking about. They probably have the minimum information about me. They see an account page with I have internet and cell phone through them, and he's offering me solutions that I'm resisting and causing unnecessary suffering towards myself, and more specifically, to those that I'm interacting with. So in truth, it was a small problem. The cable isn't in the way. They already offered me a fix. Big resistance equals lots of suffering, even for something so small. I found that being civil in troublesome situations has always yielded happier, more productive results. Sadly, the day AT&T came, I obviously was not feeling that way. But what if I had reacted with less resistance? So in my AT&T situation, my pain, my inconvenience barely registered. It was a 1, but I was resistant to everything. that's an 8 or a 9. So automatically my suffering's at an 8 or a 9. If I had just said, oh, look, that looks silly for a day, and just accepted it, it would have just been a 1 on the scale. Again, I'm not sure what it is that makes it so easy to tear ourselves down when or set expectations, but we do. And if we have compassion towards ourselves, we have an easier time extending our compassion outwards. So to nullify the resistance in our math equation, we must learn acceptance. That's the antidote. It works in trivial things like minor inconveniences of my ceiling tiles. When we accept or even let go of our resistance, any discomfort becomes manageable. If we notice when something uncomfortable arises, we can observe the thoughts of resistance, regain our center by accepting the new situation. Bring mindfulness to the sensations. Continue the practice as life changes and brings on inevitable hardships. So my AT&T story was a lot of ego, a lot of self-expectations. And I've used this sutta here before, and I found a study that shed a different light on it. In fact, I feel like the last time I used the sutta, I did it wrong and I misunderstood it. And then I found the study group on it, and it made me rethink everything. So this is the Malika Sutta from Samyutta Nikaya 3.8. I think it's also in the Dhammapada. But at this time, King Pasenadi of Kosala was on the upper terrace of the palace with Queen Malika. And the king asked her, Malika, is there anyone dearer to you than yourself? Your Majesty, there is no one dearer to me than myself. And you, sire, is anyone dearer to you than yourself? Nor is there anyone dearer to me, Malika, than myself. Then the king went down from the palace and visited the Blessed One and told him the whole story. And the Blessed One, understanding, thereupon uttered this verse: though in thought we range throughout the world, we'll nowhere find a thing more dear than self. So since others hold the self so dear, he who loves himself should injure none. But if you think about who do you love the most, in this story, in this study group that I followed along with, this is the story of King Pasenadi and Queen Malika. The King Pasenadi was the king of Kosala during the time of the Buddha and was a student of the Buddha. And Queen Malika was the chief queen to King Pasenadi. And then in the story, when both of them one day decided that they were going to go and meditate on the question of who do you love the most? After several hours in contemplation of this, they came to report to each other. And the king then asked Queen Malika what she had seen. Who did she love the most? And now, instead of the queen replying, well, you, my darling king, she said, actually, I saw that truly I love nobody. Everyone around me is here to serve me, please me. And in reality, the only person I love is myself. So instead of calling for her to be banished from the place or palace, and the king replied, Malika, I saw the exact same thing. Me too. I love nobody. So then the two of them went to see the Buddha, and they told him what they had seen. And the Buddha looked at him and was like, sadhu, 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 well done, well done. You've seen the truth. So now, having seen the truth, you yourselves could now have the possibility and the energy to work on this and correct it. If we can learn to see it into our own minds and understand how much is run by wrongdoing, we become kind of horrified in the beginning. Become kind of horrified in the beginning, and by the realization of how deeply selfish we can be, how we are incapable of really loving anyone other than ourselves, and how all actions are constantly being driven with selfish motivations. We are selfishly driven and attached to ourselves. We're not able to be truly generous, even if we give things, because we'll be disappointed if we're not thanked. Let's say I gave you something. How dare you not thank me for in return? And really, in reality, excuse me, we never really gave anything at all if we gave something with expectations. The gift was just an attempt to buy someone's love or appreciation of the other person. Selfishness is not even able to be grateful or to respect what is good in the world. Selfishness blinds you from that. You don't see good where there is good, and you don't see bad where there is bad. The only things that selfish behaviors bring up is you're able to see good when there's good for me, or you only see bad when the bad's towards you. For example, if our gratitude to somebody lasts only as long as the person shows us more affection than they do towards other people, if we become jealous as soon as they show more affection or more attention towards somebody else, then what kind of gratitude is that? This is a mistake that we can often make when we go on and seek refuge in others to find happiness or joy. It's amazing that on the inverse of that, if they are mad at us, we could just easily find any reason to hate them. They became a source of suffering to us. We may hate the anger that they have towards us to a point that we feel it's unjustified. When they don't give us something that we want and we get angry at them, we find that our anger is justified, though. Selfishness and a mind clouded with wrongdoing cannot see things as they truly are. We become unable to see right as right. We become unable to see wrong as wrong. Importantly, we are unable to see the true value of things as they are. Instead, love turns to hate in a second. Let's look at the pandemic, something that has impacted everybody. At the beginning, many people were following social distancing, staying at home, remote schooling, remote work. Majority of people were okay with this. And over time, people became restless. People wanted to get out and do things that they used to do. Mental health was declining. I think one of the most profitable areas of the pandemic may actually be therapy. The therapists were probably really thriving. And companies would still instill their rules of, no masks or masks. Restaurants were going to carry out only. They even changed liquor laws for a lot of them. Like, oh yeah, restaurants can sell booze to go now. And the limited seating, everybody was greatly impacted. But as things started lessening, and there are people sticking to a more stricter guideline of rules, there's always people that feel like they're being singled out. Their rights are being stepped on. They feel threatened because people have the intentions of well-being towards other people. And they're thinking, well, I still have to wear a mask. I read somewhere that that's made up and doesn't make sense. And you should allow me to not wear a mask, or I should be able to eat off your all-you-can-eat buffet with getting my own food. I don't have to have somebody else. These are all things that I have witnessed, and it's not a matter of people being threatened. The intentions behind people just wanting safety is where people start feeling selfish and that they're being impacted and they're not getting the things that they want. There's an Indian restaurant that opened up its doors to dine in. They used to be carry out. My coworkers frequent it. They used to have an all-you-can-eat buffet, and that's why I brought up the all-you-can-eat buffet. They went in there and they saw that the buffet was closed, and then they turned around and walked out, and then they came to the office and complained about it. Now they went back to it now that the buffet is there, but the server has to get you their food. So there's only one person touching the spoon, and there's no cross contamination. But they also only have 3 items on the buffet, and they're trying to limit things and limit exposure. But for some people, that's not good enough. They want it the way it used to be, and it's difficult to adjust to things that are outside of your control. So everyone in this scenario, I emphasize again, they did it with intentions of safety. But there will always be people that feel that it's a violation of what they want. One thing to keep in mind is that all people everywhere are made up the exact same. Everybody has hair, skin, muscles, bone, all of our cells that multiply and divide. We're all the same. All over the world, there are people who are suffering from selfishness or the lack of self-compassion. They are constantly looking out to other people who are also suffering from the same exact situations. When we can recognize this, we are able to turn inside. We're able to remove our obstacles and find refuge within ourselves. And that concludes my talk. I'd like to end with the Four Immeasurables. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be disassociated from the supreme happiness, which is without suffering. May they remain in the boundless equanimity, free from both attachment to close ones and rejections of others. Thank you.